hosted by Cosmo Sports and Entertainment. I am Evan Colborn, Director of Business Development with Cosmo Sports and Entertainment, and this is Carrie, President of Cosmo Sports and Entertainment. Our webinar series today is brought to you by Central Counties Tourism and Sport Durham, so special thanks to both those groups for putting on this webinar series and allowing us to host it. As we go through, we're going to have some slides on the screen behind us here. If you find it difficult to see anything that's on the screen, don't worry. We're going to make all the slides available to everybody who's registered for the webinar. So as long as you've registered and signed up ahead of time, you'll get a copy of the slides. So don't worry if you can't see anything. We're going to reserve the last few minutes. I know we're running a few minutes late, so apologies for that, but we're going to reserve the last couple of minutes for Q&A. If you are a Google subscriber or you have a Google account and I assume you're watching on the YouTube page, if you look in the top right corner of your screen, there's a live chat. You can submit questions through there anytime throughout the broadcast. If you're not a Google subscriber and you still have a question, you can send it by email. You can send it to info@cosmosports.com, or you can go on to our website, and under the About Us tab on the team page, you'll find all of our emails there. So feel free to send it directly to myself. You can send it to Carrie or whoever. And same goes for if any questions come up after we're done here today. If you think of something later and it relates to anything sponsorship related, then please send us a question. We're happy to address that. So with the live chat, please submit questions as you think of them throughout the broadcast. There is a bit of a delay on the broadcast, so if you wait to the last minute, we may not see the question before we actually wrap up here live. So please submit the questions as you think of them. And we've got Rebecca and Michael just off camera here that are monitoring the chat, so they'll get to all the questions that we have time for at the end. So with that, so episode 4, we're going to be talking about sponsorship meetings. And so far we've talked about what sponsors want. We've talked about how to identify sponsorship inventory. We've talked about how to understand what that's worth. We've also talked about how to determine who to reach out to and how to understand who the right decision maker is that you want to be reaching out to set up the meetings, and then tactfully, how do you reach out and actually do that, whether by phone or email or LinkedIn and things like that. So so today's episode is really gonna dive into what do you do when after you've done that outreach and you've got a positive response and somebody's actually agreed to an in-person meeting, is how are you going to conduct that meeting? Now, it may seem like a little bit crazy to dedicate an entire episode to one meeting, but we thought it was really important, and I know you think this topic's a really important one as well.
Yeah, I do. I think that I think a lot of people are afraid of meetings. A lot of people on both sides. So both sponsors may want to avoid it because a meeting is in person. It's harder to say no. It's confrontational potentially, or it's at least can be stressful. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people with events or on what we say the property side of the business, or some of you guys that are watching today, the truth is you're reluctant to have a meeting. And the reality is meetings are far, far more successful than emails or phone calls are going to be. So when people are saying, email me a package, you should want to do everything you can not to do that. Fill out a form, email. So if your goal is truly getting sponsors, and I say to everybody here, I assume that's the discussion, as opposed to, well, I did my job. I sent out 10 emails to companies and they replied or didn't reply, or they gave me yeses or nos. If you really want to get sponsors, the sponsorship deals happen in meetings, and initial meetings, not I have to get step 1, 2, 3, 4, and then have a meeting. You won't get to step 4 if you don't start with a meeting. So again, I think feels like maybe surprising that it's a full topic, but I think it's a really underrated one. I think the meeting is where camaraderie is built, and essentially where the beginning, at least, of transactions happen.
Right. So a couple outcomes from today's topic. So we're going to go through a 4-step process on meetings and how to conduct this initial needs analysis meeting with a potential sponsor. We're also going to address how to really common question and something you're really trying to hoping to get out of the sponsorship meeting and this initial meeting is a budget or a rough cost of kind of something you put into a proposal. It can be tough question to get an answer to. So we're going to go through how to actually get an answer to that. We're also going to touch on some follow-up strategies and how to help yourself stand out even further after the meeting's taken place, and how you can follow up to help your cause. So one thing we did want to note at the beginning here is that a theme throughout our episodes so far has really been that it's all about them. And even at this stage, now they've agreed to an in-person, face-to-face meeting with us. Kind of think that that's probably because they see some sort of fit there, but it's even at this point, it's still all about them. The temptation might be there to jump in and start talking about ourselves, talk about our event or our property, or the assets that we have and all that kind of stuff, but really have to resist that temptation and keep it really still all about them at this stage.
Right. I would even sort of step back and say, once we've established a meeting, but even to get that meeting, we say, well, why would somebody meet with us? It depends how you word it. If you say, would you meet with me because I want to tell you about our hockey team, you're unlikely to get a meeting. If you say, I'd like to meet you to learn more about Swiss Chalet or to learn more about RBC, that's a much harder meeting to turn down. And see, I'd like to learn more about RBC's goals and see if there even is a potential fit with us. So even getting the meeting, I think people are going to be saying, well, it's very hard to get a meeting. Not, are you asking the right question? It's very hard to get a meeting if you say, I'd like to tell you about our festival. Why would somebody who works at a bank and is busy with 100 things today want to sit down with you and learn about your festival? Right. So I think even getting the meeting, there's a bit of an art to a skill to doing.
Yeah. So to frame our scenario, we've set this whole webinar series up to be very sequential and following the sponsorship process through step by step. So at this stage, really, we've done some pretty extensive research on the company and the person that we're meeting with, based on what we can find online in terms of what they're interested in sponsorship or marketing, and the person specifically, looking at their LinkedIn profile, things like that, trying to understand a little bit of what they're interested in and what they care about. So we've done that research. We've developed a pretty good understanding of our organization, our properties and assets, and what we have available to offer if it gets to that stage, and roughly what some of those things might be worth. So we have a pretty good understanding there. We've reached out. We've gotten a positive response. They've agreed to take a meeting, and we've identified through that research. We've identified an initial fit based on that research. There's some reason there that we think makes sense to have a meeting, and we've mentioned that to them, and then at this stage they tend to agree. So everything going well so far. So you show up at the meeting. Really, I mean, how are you getting started? Like, what's that first couple minutes of the meeting really looking like?
Well, I think there's a rapport building. It's on the slide there, but I think rapport building is not traffic and weather. I think that can be, but that's a default. Everybody's going to say, how's your day? Are you busy? What's the traffic? You really haven't built. You may do that while you're walking in the building, but I think rapport building is more. A good question, for instance, is, do you mind if I ask? And by the way, I think I may have mentioned in the previous summer, things like, do you mind if I ask, is a very good way to ask a question, because it leaves them the ability to say no. Most people say yes. But do you mind if I ask how long you've been at Pet Value, or how long you've been at Swiss Chalet? That's a good starter. Again, it's talking about them and themselves, or you can look at their job title. You're meeting with the marketing manager and saying, I'd like to get a sense of, what is it? What is a marketing manager at Country Style Coffee, or what is a marketing manager? What is, if you don't mind me asking, what do you do? So I think there's a rapport building, which is, again, more than a generic, it's cold outside, but much less than talking about the conversation. If you can get to a place where they're comfortable and they're not looking at you generally people are looking at you as a meeting as an inconvenience,
right? Half
an hour not well spent. So if you can do something to shift that and build a bit of a relationship, it's obviously going to help.
Yeah. So in that first couple minutes, you also want to, you want to read them a little bit to see what what kind of meeting is this going to be? Because you might get some people that are very open to that, small talk in the beginning, want to build some rapport, but you might get somebody who's just really, I want to get right down to business. I've got a half an hour. Let's go.
Yeah, it's hard. This is a hard thing to teach. But we use the term that you have to be a bit of a chameleon. If you're meeting in a corporate office as opposed to meeting somebody at a wings restaurant, and you have exactly the same demeanor, you may fail in both places. So I think you have to try and maintaining your integrity. And people say be yourself. Well, that's true, but people have multiple selves. You don't talk to your parents the same way you talk to a friend, the same way you talk to a stranger, the same way you talk to somebody in business. So I think it's the same thing in this environment. If somebody's says, hey, I don't have, for instance, if they start the meeting by saying, hey, apologies, but I only have 20 minutes or something like that, that's usually an indication that they want to get to the point. That
Right.
You saying, isn't it a beautiful day outside is not going to be great. There's other situations where you don't want to jump in and say, okay, let's go to slide one. So I think you try and gauge the situation. It's, again, hard to train for, but if you're observing and you're listening, you can quickly get at a lot of information.
Right. Hard to train, but it's probably more of a practice thing that you need to do. So
yeah,
for sure. So there's one kind of thing that you like to do a lot of times when in initial part of a meeting, which is ask for a tour of the business. So maybe you just tell us a bit of why do you like to do that? What are you hoping to get out of that?
Yeah, I think I'm hoping to get a couple things. First of all, people are very proud of their business. So generally, and again, you can tour a hair salon. I think I mentioned that example before. You can tour a small restaurant, or you can tour a dental office. In other words, it doesn't have to be a really interesting, intricate factory or so what it does, a couple things. One, it definitely builds rapport. Now, this would be more in the meeting where you feel like you have a fair bit of time there, as opposed to a quick in and out. You truly get to learn about their business. You're going to learn things in those 10 minutes or 20 minutes. People are generally excited about it. Not a lot of other people in your position have asked to have a tour before. Now, all that's great. But what I would say is if you do a tour as a ploy, that, hey, I watched a seminar and Carrie and Evan said to do a tour, your tours are not going to be very good. You have to be curious. And if you're curious about their business or what they do, it's going to lead you in good places. If you're doing it because you feel you have to, you shouldn't do it.
Right.
So for me, I am truly curious. And I also know, the self-serving part is that the more I know about their business, the more opportunity we're going to build rapport, and the more opportunity probably we're going to work together. But you sort of got to start. You have to do it with integrity. And again, so I think tours are a great idea, but you have to want to do it. This is the whole thing that I said earlier. For those who are in sponsorship, do you want to be successful in it? And if you look at it as a chore, or I have to do this, or we're not doing well, and some of you guys listening may feel like you're in that position. The unfortunate thing about that, you're very unlikely to be successful. If you look at it, take pride in it, and saying, I'm going to do something good for this business that I'm meeting with. I want to learn about them. I want to help them out. I want to do something for their business. And I believe that sponsorship may be more valuable than their digital advertising, what they're doing with Facebook, or if they're doing any traditional radio or stuff like that. If you really believe that working with your festival is going to be good for them, you buy in and you believe it. And so that's a big part of it. But yeah, touring shows that you care about them.
Yeah. So even in an office environment, something that maybe is not particularly unique, you'd still want to do that tour?
Usually, I'd say, I would say if it's a traditional office, maybe not. I was at a meeting yesterday and I asked if their factory was on site with the intention of doing a tour. They said no. And it really was an office with a small office. So I didn't ask for the tour, but I've also said I've been in some really interesting offices where you walk around and you're fascinated by what they're doing in different apartments. The other thing, so let's say take that example of an office, right? You think, okay, well, let's say they give you a tour, you're walking around, or even if the distance it takes to walk from when you get into the boardroom, it's great to say, well, what are those guys doing over there? Oh, how does they say, oh, that's our digital department, or these guys are in purchasing, or these. So again, there's a lot of opportunities within the situation to ask questions, and you don't know where they're going to lead. They may not lead anywhere, but they may lead into an opportunity. So, yeah, is it always the case? Absolutely not. But it's a good thing to have in your mind that, especially what I would say is when there's factories. So people take a lot of pride in their factory and their distribution and their storage. And if so, there's a big factory in the back, and it's fascinating, frankly, to see it. You'd see, usually people are amazed what goes on in that business. So I think a factory or a machine shop or pretty interesting. So yeah, again, you have to gauge that you have time to do it, but it's generally a good rule.
Yeah. Okay. So now you've built a little bit of rapport, maybe done some small talk, you've done a tour of their business. Out of respect for the person's time, you do eventually want to get to the point and get to the business. So, so how do you kind of transition from, okay, I'm building rapport now, I want to talk about what I came here to talk about?
Yeah, softly. So first of all, I think if again, and a lot of these examples sound harder to implement. It's and I think experience covers a lot of it, but it's a soft transition. So if for instance, somebody's saying, oh, in marketing, I do, we do events 3 times a year, and I run our staff barbecue. And if you can say, and let's say you're a team that sells hockey tickets, if you can say, oh, it's interesting, staff barbecue, do you ever do anything like that in the winter? Well, why do you ask? Well, just something. A lot of groups that, one of the things that companies can do that do barbecues in the summer or do golfing events in the summer, banquets, is consider bringing your staff out to a hockey game in the winter. So there's lots of different ways to do it. I think what I would say is do it softly. So saying the bad things, the hard things are very bad. So let's say you're partway through and you say, well, yeah, let's get, I wanted to get to the point, or the reason that I came in, or, I know your time's limited, when you don't really know their time's limited. Those are bad. Those are hard stops. And the problem with doing hard stops is it really makes the impression that the first part, that you didn't really care about the tour or what their background is. We say, hey, the reason we came in, or, why we're here today is to talk about sponsorship. That's very cold. And that really makes it like, even if you did care at the beginning, it sort of throws that away. It says like, I'm here to talk. That was just small talk. Yeah. Whereas, so less specific, more saying, if it takes an extra couple minutes to do it, just a softer approach is a better way.
Yeah. So once you get into the next phase, really what you're trying to do is you've done a fair bit of research already. So you're really looking to qualify that research and, hear it firsthand. So
right.
You can get what you can by online, but you're trying to hear it from the source directly. Right. That's exactly what they are interested in.
Right.
And everything.
And do your do your research. So if you need to be prepared for the question where they say, "What do you know about us?" Take that one question, guys, and say, "What do you know about our company?" Are you ready for that question? Doesn't mean you have to know. You're not going to know as much as them, but you want to be saying, "Oh, I know you're St. Louis Wings, and I know you started in Chicago, and you've got 20 locations in Canada, and 2 of them are right here in Waterloo." And that you guys are, your wings is you're proud of your wings, but you've done a lot of stuff in you're selling hamburgers the last few years. Basic stuff. Front page of their website probably tells you a lot of that, or a little bit about us. Go to About Us, go to Services, but do your homework, because the worst thing to do is if you go into a situation and what kind of sponsorship have they done? Like you're going in from a sponsorship perspective. It's Google's a great thing. It doesn't take long to find out. If you Google the company that you're meeting and the word sponsorship, and some things come up, or partnerships or marketing or events, it's good. You may not even use those. It may not come up, but it's good to kind of know that kind of stuff. What's their slogan? Do you know their mission statement or their slogan? Like, again, it's limited information, but you should have that going in.
Right. And this opportunity too, you can find what you can online about a particular person, look at their LinkedIn profile, things like that. But you're trying to also learn about them, and what do they care about? What are they interested in? And because, like we talked about in some of the earlier episodes, bias is a big deciding factor when it comes to actually making a sponsorship decision. So it's what's important to them as well as the organization. So
that's true. It's very important. The individual it's hard for them to leave their bias out of it. So if they have kids that are involved in certain sports, or they do things, or they have hobbies, there's a tendency to gravitate in that direction. So if you can know something about them, that helps
you. So really the meat of the meeting, the bulk of what you're doing is asking these open-ended questions. And like you said, during the tour, is having genuine curiosity about the answers, and not just doing it, because we said to on this webinar, but it's because you're legitimately curious about their business, and you're asking questions that you're hoping are going to provide you some insight that can help you with your sponsorship. And so in a way, I guess you're acting as a bit of a marketing consultant. You're trying to understand who their target market is, what they've done in the past, like you said, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what types of activations they really like to do. So a lot of open-ended questions where you're legitimately curious. But so there's that expression, there's no such thing as a bad question. But is that the case in this kind of context?
Yeah, I think there's better questions than others. I think an example, I don't think it's on the slide here, but I think one model that I like is a doctor. Think of if you walk in, I know I'm jumping ahead here on the slides, but if you walk in and say, here's our deck, here's our presentation, here's our proposal, or here's who we are. That's sort of like if you walk to a doctor's office and he or she says, here's 2 Advils for your head. Hello, Evan. Here's 2 Advils. See it. Or here, let's put a splint on your finger. You're like, I didn't hurt my finger. So what a doctor does is it's lots of open-ended. It's what happened? Why are you here? Well, I hurt my leg. I fell down. Okay, what happened? Is it bruised? How long ago did it happen? All that information. They take in all that information prior to even considering a diagnosis or what medicine you have. I think, again, if you think of yourself that way and asking questions that determine, like, you have your world, which is the things that potentially you could fit them into. And I think sometimes the fear is to think, well, if I ask all these open-ended questions, it may not come back to they want tickets to an event. It may not. But tickets to an event, for instance, can be for employees. They can be for customers. They can be philanthropy. They can be donated through charity. They can be a group coming out. They can be a community group. So I think if you open yourself up and ask those open-ended questions, you have more remedies, diagnosis, things available at your disposal than you might think.
Right.
So anyways, I think that the questions are the good questions, for lack of a better word, are the ones that get information out of them. And I think the other thing is too, you have to be, this is the whole sort of, it's tricky at the beginning, but if you're reading off a list of questions, it's not as good. If you ask question 1 or 2 and they give you an interesting answer, delve deeper into the answer. Yes, some of that comes with experience, but again, if you want it to feel interactive rather than they're filling out a multiple choice test.
Right. So there is when thinking of questions to ask, there is some risk in, you don't want to go on the one hand, information that's readily available on their homepage.
Yeah.
You want to show that you've done some research, right, and you at least looked at the website.
Right.
So you don't want to be asking questions about things that are right on their homepage.
Right.
But you also don't want to go the other side and then go overly complicated or too technical. Right. And in some cases you can risk even embarrassing the person.
Yeah. The first part, first of all, so what's your mission statement? It's a terrible question. So, there are bad questions. what's your vision? What's your mission statement? Because that's your first one. It means you didn't, what's important to you. Some of that, that's a variation of it. But, and I agree. I think if you get too complicated and get in technical aspects, first of all, they may not know the answer and now you're embarrassing them. Two, it may not be relevant, or you get pulled so far away in a direction that you can't find your way back. And, to try and keep it topical too. So I think there's a happy medium there, is asking questions. So if you do your research and you look on the website, that's going to create questions for yourself. You may see their mission statement, but the question might be, well, what do they mean by that? Or you might see that they believe in health and wellness as a pillar. And you could say, well, I just want to understand health and wellness. What do you guys mean by that? Well, that's kind of exciting. They've had discussions about that. That's the kind of thing where people can get excited.
Great. So very similar, I guess, to reading that, reading the other person in the early part of the meeting, and then being able to kind of understand where to take the meeting. And questions, again, it's going to be practice. Early stages, if your first couple of times doing this, probably okay to have a few prepared questions. Right. But over time, you're going to get better and better at it and be able to dig deeper.
No, it's a good point. I don't want to say, I've done this for a while and in a lot of meetings, done a lot of sponsorship, and I think I don't use whatever crutches and tools and are going to help you in the meetings. So don't, you can't, it's hard to wing all of it and do all that stuff. It's not going to be comfortable to do it. So use whatever tools help you to get there. But also, there's a truth in being humble and honest and yourself too, as opposed to being pushy or aggressive. And I think that comes with most people. That's their human nature, is to be conversational and friendly. And so, I think if you over stress yourself out, that, hey, I'm going into a meeting with RBC and this is really important and it's nervous and I got to convince them to do sponsorship, and you're going to mess it up. If you go into a meeting and and you walk in and you see that they have a really neat branch at RBC and you say, oh, this is really cool. What's the story on this table? If you're so focused on the meeting, you're not going to think that way. And it's important that, to whatever degree you can, I'm not going to be able to take all the stress away from that situation, but if you can try and take it in, for lack of a better word, you're going to be more effective in the meeting.
Yeah. So just a couple examples here of some questions. Again, you want to understand who their target audience is, what have they done in the past that's worked for them, what hasn't worked in the past, those types of things. A lot of there's no end to the questions you could ask, but again, want them to be relevant and the purpose. But great. So again, we said, the questions and that dialogue is really going to be the bulk. It's going to be the majority of the meeting. At some point, again, you have to kind of transition to the next step. And the next step really in this meeting is not so much to transition to talking about ourselves. It's in some ways, transitioning to getting them to invite a proposal, or getting them to agree that, yes, I also see a fit here. I'd be open to seeing more.
Yeah. And I think what you're really looking at, potential fit, I think it's hard on the spur of the moment to come up with exactly what the proposal is. More often than not, the first meeting sometimes is taking in a lot of information and then going back, trying to digest that and say, what does this mean? And is there a proposal that could work? So there's nothing wrong with saying, in essence, leaving and saying, you know what, that's really interesting stuff. I want to go back to see if there's a proposal that might fit. So don't panic and think that you necessarily have to find a match in the meeting. But as you said, I think you want to, if you can create some seeds of intrigue. So if we put something together that would be good for your customers, would that be something you're interested in? Or, if, our events, would you be interested in your name on a stage or naming rights? Or do you want, is sampling something that's interesting? And, part of it too is you're going to get some no's in the process. So one thing you got to be careful is if somebody says sampling is not in, you're really excited that you've got a festival and sampling's great, and they say, well, you know what, for our business, really, we don't. It's too hard for us to be doing sampling of our shampoo products, or. And if you say, well, why is that? Or in other words, if you're confrontational there, you're probably not going to get very far. So I think it's better to say, well, then when you go to events in the past, what does work for you? And they may say, well, it's branding, or we do like to do something interactive with, we just like to collect names, or we like to give away coupons, or and then they go back to Shoppers Drug Mart and buy the shampoo. Um, there's a reason and a history for why different companies do different things. So, yeah, again, you don't want to be confrontational, and so in short, that transition or to get the discussion going is really trying to get a sense from them, or what are the kind of things that, one good question is, what are the kind of things that have worked for you in sponsorship in the past? Have you ever done any experiential events? Have you ever done any sort of entertainment options? Okay. And what are they, and have they worked? Do they haven't? And so they say no. Have you ever considered it? One, you can throw some nuggets, like, one of the things with entertainment options is there's a high loyalty factor. People are in a good frame of mind. And, again, is it something you'd consider? So I think what you want to do, as you say, is get them comfortable to a second meeting. What you're really selling in the first meeting is a second meeting where you'll have more time to really think it through. And the other thing I would say, it's really important, take good notes. You'll think on the spur of the moment that you're going to remember everything. The way the way most people are is they think in the moment that they've got it and it's current and they know it. Well, life gets in the way and you're going to forget. So if you take really good notes and, put it into a CRM system and kind of, really listen and take notes, I think when you come back, now you have time to turn, to match those notes with your notes. So look at you can sit home at your office and match your deck per se, or your rate card with all the notes you just got at the meeting. And what's pretty interesting is you'll probably find some matches that maybe you didn't see at the time.
Yeah. So another thing that that we've talked about that was really important at this stage, assuming there's a fit and you think there's an opening for a proposal,
Mm-hmm.
That next meeting is, you can try to set that next meeting in the meeting. And the example that I know you use quite a bit is like a dentist. So, if you think of at the dentist office, before you leave, usually the last thing they do is they set your next appointment, which could be 9 months down the road, on a Tuesday at 2 p.m., but you still set that appointment.
Yeah, people are sort of afraid of this. A lot of this whole discussion is people are afraid of persistence and follow up and setting times and asking for dollars. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Asking for dollars. Dentists are relentless. They have no shame. And in other words, in that point, right? The dentist will ask you if you're available on September 2nd at 11 a.m. Most people, for sure me, have no idea if I'm available. There's certain pockets of time I might know I'm not available, but I probably don't know what I'm doing Wednesday, September 2nd. But they set the time. And if you say no, you say, okay, how about Wednesday, September 9th? You should do the same thing. And sooner rather than later. So a good thing in the meeting is saying, would you be available this time next week? Is a good one. One thing true about that is, 3:00 on a Wednesday was good because you're sitting there at 3:00 on a Wednesday.
Right.
So sometimes a good time to reschedule is the exact same time a week later. Again, you need enough time where you can get your proposal ready. So maybe it's 2 weeks. 2 weeks is, I typically will do 2 weeks maybe, but not 6 weeks.
Right.
That's your problem. Like, you can't say, well, I'd like 6 weeks to get myself organized. So yeah, I think if you can set the meeting while you're sitting there, and now everybody's got their calendar on their phone, that's an advantage.
Yeah. Right. So one of the questions, I mean, the most important pieces of information you can really get out of this initial needs analysis meeting. Also, one of the more difficult ones for people to actually get an answer to is, so if there's interest on both sides, what's a budget that we could work with? And so how do you ask that question?
Yeah, so it's good. I think first of all, people are terrified to ask. So I think money is a very sensitive. You don't ask your. Most people know a lot of things about their brother, sister, or best friends, but you probably don't know how much money they make. And people are very. You could say, if I said to you, everything about your best friend. Oh, I know everything about my best friend. I said, what's their salary? Guess. I said, no. Why are you guessing? You've never asked them. They're your best friend. You've never asked them their exact salary and commissions, length of contract, and so it's a very sensitive. People are generally sensitive about money. Similarly, people are afraid to ask. And again, it's not really budget. A better way to say is maximum budget. What's a maximum budget, or what ideally what you'd be able. So people, first of all, are afraid to ask the question. So and they start overthinking it. Well, they're not going to tell me. Well, you don't know that. It's important because if you ask somebody what their maximum budget for a program is, and they might say it's only $20,000, and you might have walked in thinking you were only going to propose $3,000. They might say it's only $3,000, and you were going to propose 20. And it's an important question, and it's also important to get the real answer. So, and you have to be persistent. So you'll say here's how the most common one goes is, do you mind if I ask what's your budget or what's your maximum budget? It said, we really don't have one, or we've spent it, or it changes year to year. And so ask again in different ways. So at that moment, say, okay, just, we're going to work on a proposal for you. I just don't want to be way out of line, or do something so if you can give me sort of a range or an example of some other events you've done and how much you've spent, so you may need to ask 2 or 3 or 4 times in different ways.
Right.
And again, we use the language here, polite and persistent and polite. As long as you're polite continuously, you can be persistent. And I think they go hand in hand. Saying, look, you could say, sorry, I know I'm asking you a few different ways. You say that. Sorry, I'm asking you a few different ways, but it would really be helpful. At some point, you walk away and say, okay, well, it sounds like there's no. Another one is people say my 2018 budget spent. So my answer is great. Great, we can get a head start in 2019. So do you have a sense on what your 2019 budget might be? And let's meet and talk about that. And the truth is, there's a good chance when you have that 2019 meeting, if there's something that's really exciting for them, they'll put it in their 2018 budget. Right. So again, you're right, Evan. It's a very tricky question, but it's not as bad as people make it out to be. There's way more people that are just afraid to ask the question. It's important when you go back. It's a really helpful information if you got it.
Yeah. So I wanted to touch on the word maximum, because I know it's a really important point. Yeah. The distinction between what's your budget and what's your maximum budget. Maybe you can touch.
Yeah, I like to say, you guys can see I'm having Tim Hortons coffee or the tea. If I ask you how much you spend at Tim Hortons, you might say $2. You might say $0. You might say $2. How much do you usually spend at Tim Hortons? $2. What's the most you've ever spent at Tim Hortons in your life? For yourself? $12. Totally different answer. So so how does that apply? If you say to somebody, what's your budget? And they have $1 million of marketing, but they only plan to spend $5,000 in the hockey team. Then, my budget is probably about $5,000. If you say, in a perfect world, if we brought you the best case scenario and you shifted funds from other places and you found that and I would say all these words sometimes, and you found that our investment was the best investment in your entire marketing portfolio, what is the most that you guys possibly consider spending? $300,000. They just went from 5 to 100. Maximum is a short version to kind of say that, but I think they're two entirely different questions. So the person listening to this that thinks we're saying what's your budget is asking the wrong question. The question is what's the most you would consider spending at Tim Hortons? That it's a more valuable, and you may end up with the $3,000. They may come back and do the $5,000 for sports, but it's good for you to know what the potential is.
Yeah. I'm not sure how often this happens, but in some cases you might come across somebody that is prompting that question themselves, asking, what's the cost? What's the level of investment we're looking at here? How would you kind of address that?
Yeah, I'd rather it's a bit of a game of chicken, and I sort of like to do it later, have the proposer get their budget. But sometimes you're pressed, right? You're saying, look, I don't know my budget. I need to know what the size of your package is. What I will typically say is we have a big range. We have opportunities from $500 to $100,000, and the ones higher up really provide the best value. Something like that. So it's not a straight answer, it's a curved answer, but it's saying there's a range, but or something like, our happiest partners are spending about $10,000 a year. Now, that means somebody could be spending $500, but the companies that get the most value are spending in the $10,000 to $15,000 a year. So it's a version of an answer. What I really want to discourage is, and it's the truth. The truth is, if somebody buys a sign at your event, they're probably getting the least value of anybody, as opposed to a interactive, larger package, which is by definition going to be more expensive.
So you touched on it a little bit, but you might come across somebody who's just really difficult. They're not budging in on any of the questions you ask 5 different ways. So at that point, you really don't have much to go on. But so what are you going to think of in terms of a budget to propose when you?
I think larger rather than, I think first of all, you want to put things together, and I think come up with something large but fair that you get excited about, because it's easy. They can take something out. It's much less likely if you give somebody a $500 package that they're going to say, you know what, I want to spend $5,000. This is great. I'd like to do 10 of these. But if you propose $50,000, they might say, $50,000, this is crazy. And you have to be ready to say, well, we wanted to put everything in there. And this could be at a meeting, and you're going back to that second question because they never gave you the amount. Like, what would be the most you guys would consider? Oh, 5,000. Okay. Well, there's portions in there that we could probably find something for that. Yeah. But I think if you start higher, I think it's this fear of somebody saying, you showed me a $50,000 package, I'm going home. Like, I'm done. I'm not doing anything with you because the number you showed me is too high. I think you have to be prepared. That's very rare. Showing a lot, the more likely is that you just quickly have to be able to scale it back. Right. So you want to be aggressive, but and again, that's in a situation where you don't have it. Now, you could have 2 or 3 different options. I usually prefer one, but you could have 2 or 3 that are tiered. But make sure if you do that, the meatiest one, the one that's the most exciting, is the largest one. If they look similar, then people are going to migrate to the smaller opportunity.
So the follow-up is a topic we also wanted to talk about. So you've asked your open-ended questions. You've hopefully got a good answer on the budget question. Feel like you've got everything you need to develop a proposal. You're taking it back to your office. But in the meantime, in between this meeting and the next meeting, there shouldn't be silence. Anyway, there should be some sort of follow-up. Why do you think that's important? Why is that something that we should be doing, as opposed to, are people going to miss it if it doesn't happen? Or?
Yeah, I think it's a thank you. I think it's more common courtesy than anything else. I think you met somebody, hopefully built up good rapport, yes or no. It's saying, thanks for their time. What they did give up, no matter what, is half an hour of their time. And I think the most important part of that follow-up is a thank you. But if there's some takeaways, if some things were discussed that you're going to do or they're going to do, that's a good place to mention. And by the way, those emails should be short. If they're sort of larger than that, it's too long. I get way too many emails that are too long. I've got probably 3 or 4 today about people with ideas, and I'm not reading them. Unfortunately for people, there's a lot of people in my position. If something's not going to catch your attention quickly, you may not look at it at all.
Right. So some follow-ups. I mean, you mentioned email. That's probably the standard that most people come to expect is, they're going to get an email from you thanking them for the time. But there's some unique ways that we've seen people utilize that follow-up to further differentiate themselves or further help their cause. Handwritten notes are something that you hear mentioned a lot. Concept that we've kind of been talking about is branded USBs. So some USBs, a lot of people use them, and if you can have kind of a unique leaf behind that somebody's actually going to use as opposed to end up in the recycling bin or the trash, then something.
Yeah, it's a modern version of a pen. USB, like you guys were telling me, is like $9 now. So is it worth a $9 investment for somebody who could be a partner? Probably. So those are. Anything like that's good. If you have 2 tickets to an upcoming event, you can give them 2 tickets, regardless of if they're sponsoring, or 4 tickets or something. That's a nice leave away too.
Yeah. Great. So we've gone, this is kind of the bulk of the presentation we've gone through. And some people might be wondering, okay, when do I bring out my deck? When this whole presentation was still all about them, when do I talk about me?
Yeah, I think it depends. I think you have it with you. I think if they bring it up, I think it's a good time. I think it's to have something with you that you can talk about, that you're comfortable, that you have that security with you. But it's hard to answer because each situation is a little bit differently. But I think my guess is if most people aren't bringing it out too late. So sometimes it's a leave away. Sometimes it's just you leave the meeting and you leave them, say, hey, we didn't get, I know you were in a rush. If you want to learn more about us, here it is. Sometimes it's late in the meeting. Hey, I want to walk you through. But even if you're doing that, by the time you've had all that discussion, the deck itself, some of it will apply. So the general stuff, hey, here's a little bit about us and here's our demographics and stuff. But the specifics may not apply anymore when you got to the end of the meeting. So I think you have to be honest. So if they talked for a half an hour and then you show the deck, and it's as if you didn't have a meeting. Yeah. So you're saying, oh, look at our boards. These are our boards we have. And 10 minutes ago, they just said, we don't want boards. You've got to have the common sense to say, hey, this is the page about boards, but I know that's not something for you. Let's move on. Yeah. So I think it's got to be real as opposed to contrived.
Yeah. It's okay, I guess, to leave this meeting having really talked all about them again. And because that might feel a bit uncomfortable for some people that I had this meeting and I didn't actually end up talking about anything anything about us. That's okay. You can kind of save that for the next meeting. That's really what we're going to talk about in the next one is you're taking all that research and all the information you've gathered about them, and then you're putting it into something really unique for them as opposed to a standard deck, like you said. So great. So that kind of brings us to the end of our presentation today. So hopefully takeaways from today's presentation are you're using meetings to qualify the research that you've done online, to learn more about them, to learn more about the person and the decision maker that's going to be making that decision. You want to try to get some sense of a budget. You may not get you're likely not going to get an exact number, but you want to get some sort of ballpark that gives you some guidance on a proposal and the size that you can put together. And you want to utilize your follow-ups as a way to further differentiate yourself in a way to not let the momentum kind of die in between meetings. If you are, even if it's a week or two, you don't want that momentum from the first meeting, that excitement to be forgotten even in that short time period. So, so really important topic. May seem kind of crazy to spend an episode talking about one meeting in particular, but a really important meeting and can really drive really determine a lot of the success you're going to find.
Yeah, and to me, the most important thing was at the beginning. If there's one thing to take away, it's that you need to want meetings. People tend to say, well, the company asked for an email. So what? You want to be in meetings. The success rate in meetings might be 300% higher than it will be by phone calls and emails. So in any case where the geography is close, where you're in driving distance, if it takes an hour or it takes 10 minutes, you're much better off having an in-person meeting than any electronic or phone correspondence if you can.
Great. Okay. So any questions?
So we have one question this afternoon. So in the event that you've left your sponsorship meeting and you're putting together a proposal and you still have a couple blanks to fill in or a couple questions that you still need answered, is it better just to make a quick call to the prospect and ask, or is it better to set up a whole new meeting, or what is your recommendation?
What I find in that is I don't think a call's probably unlikely it's going to work. I think an email, I think you can send an email saying there were a couple, we're working on the proposal. There were a couple of quick questions. I think use the words quick and couple. And if you have 20 questions, you're probably not going to get 20 answers. So I think part of it too is it's on you. Sometimes it's on you to figure out the answers. There's going to be some limited information. And sometimes the company doesn't know the answer to certain questions. And you still have to come up with creative answers. Even if they're not, I think expecting too much from the sponsor is a problem too. You have to be creative, and what I would answer more than anything is you can ask those questions, but you probably have to fill in your own blanks a lot of times.
Yeah. Great. All right. So thanks very much, everybody. So our next episode, there's a slight change in the time. So our next episode is actually going to be on Tuesday, March 20th at 2 p.m. So not Wednesday. It's going to be on Tuesday, March 20th. So slight change to the schedule there, but hope everybody can make it. Special thanks again to Sport Durham and Central Counties Tourism for putting on this webinar series. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll see you in a couple weeks.